She was fired for taking leftovers, but her boss asked to see her personally. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Ulla stood outside the staff entrance, holding the small plastic bag tightly to her chest, like she was stealing treasure. Inside it, 3 pieces of bread, a spoonful of rice, 2 overripe bananas, leftovers that would have been thrown away by nightfall. It's not for me, she thought. It's for my grandson. He didn't eat dinner yesterday, said he wasn't hungry. But I know he's not hungry means he saw there wasn't enough for both of us. The November wind cut through her thin uniform jacket as she walked across the employee parking lot. 20 years at Meridian Hotel's kitchen, and she still couldn't afford proper winter clothes. Her arthritis flared in the cold, making her fingers curl painfully around the plastic bag. But the pain was nothing compared to the thought of Tommy going hungry again. She was almost to the bus stop when she heard her name. "Ulla, hold up!" The voice belonged to Vernon, the hotel's security guard, a young man with sympathetic eyes but an unwavering commitment to rules. Ulla felt her heart drop to her stomach. She turned slowly, the plastic bag suddenly feeling as heavy as concrete in her hands. "Come with me, please," Vernon said, his voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Prescott wants to see you." Dread washed over her in icy waves as she followed Vernon, back through the service entrance. Daniel Prescott was the hotel's general manager, a man who walked through the kitchen like it was beneath him, who had never once addressed her by name, despite her 2 decades of service. The administrative offices felt like a different world. From the steamy, chaotic kitchen, plush carpet, soft lighting, the smell of expensive cologne rather than dish soap and sweat. Vernon knocked twice on Prescott's door before opening it and gesturing for Ulla to enter. Then he disappeared, leaving her alone with the manager. Prescott sat behind a gleaming desk, reviewing papers. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence for a full minute as she stood before him, clutching the plastic bag that now felt like damning evidence. Finally, he raised his eyes, cold, calculating. "Security footage shows you taking food from the kitchen. That's theft of company property." His voice was as emotionless as if he were reading a weather report. "You're terminated, effective immediately. Clean out your locker and leave your badge with reception." Ulla opened her mouth, but her voice caught in her throat. 20 years of service, countless early mornings and late nights. Holiday shifts when others were with their families. Times she'd come in sick because they were short-staffed. The birthday cakes she'd made for staff celebrations using her own recipes from the old country. She wanted to explain about Tommy, about her daughter's struggle with addiction and how she'd stepped in to raise her grandson, about their tiny apartment with the heating that barely worked, about how sometimes choosing between rent and food wasn't really a choice at all. She wanted to point out that the food in her bag was destined for the garbage, leftover buffet items that health codes prevented from being reserved, fruit too ripe to serve to guests. But something in Prescott's dismissive gaze stopped her. Her dignity, perhaps the only thing she truly owned in this world, wouldn't let her beg. So she nodded once, her spine straight despite the arthritis in her back, and turned to leave. "Ulla?" Prescott called, just as her hand touched the doorknob. She paused without turning. "If you contest this termination, remember we have video, evidence of theft. That could become a police matter." The threat hung in the air between them. Ulla closed her eyes briefly, then walked out without a word, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. In the employee locker room, she mechanically emptied the small metal cubicle that had been hers for 20 years. A spare hairnet, a bottle, 5 pain relievers for her arthritis, a photo of Tommy, missing his front teeth in a wide grin. Her fingers trembled as she tucked these meager possessions into her purse. The reality of her situation began crashing over her in terrible waves. No job, no references, no severance. At 62, who would hire her? How would she pay next month's rent? How would she feed Tommy? On the bus ride home, she clutched the plastic bag of now worthless food, the very thing that had cost her everything. She stared out the window as Chicago's neighborhood scrolled past, first the gleaming downtown where tourists stayed in hotels like Meridian, then progressively shabbier areas until she reached her own neighborhood in North Lawndale, where boarded-up storefronts outnumbered open businesses. Their apartment building was a 3-story walk-up, the stairs a particular cruelty to her arthritic knees. By the time she reached the 2nd floor, she heard Tommy's voice through the thin door. "Grandma, did you bring something today?" She forced a smile as she opened the door. 9-year-old Tommy sat at their tiny kitchen table, homework spread before him. His dark eyes, so like her daughter's before drugs dimmed them, lit up at the sight of the plastic bag. "I brought a little something," she said, keeping her voice steady as she began unpacking the meager items. "How about banana bread for dessert tonight?" "Yes!" Tommy pumped his fist in the air. His enthusiasm for the simplest treats always broke her heart a little. She couldn't tell him, not yet. Let him have one more evening without worry. She'd tell him tomorrow that she needed to find a new position. She'd make it sound like an adventure rather than a catastrophe. She'd somehow shield him from this latest hardship, as she'd shielded him from so many others. That night after Tommy went to bed, Ulla sat alone at the kitchen table, bills spread before her like a losing hand of cards. Without her income, from the hotel they'd have no way to pay rent next month. Her small Social Security check barely covered utilities and groceries. They had exactly $127 in savings, not even enough for a security deposit if they needed to find cheaper housing. She buried her face in her hands, allowing herself a moment of despair in the darkness. Then the ancient landline phone, kept because it was cheaper than a cell phone, shattered the silence with its ring. Ulla glanced at the clock. 10:37 p.m. No one called this late with good news. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Is this Ulla Petrov?" The female voice was unfamiliar, professionally polite. "Yes, speaking." "This is Jennifer Walsh, Executive Assistant to Mr. Alexander Reynolds, CEO of Meridian Hospitality Group." There was a pause, as if the woman expected Ulla to recognize the name. When Ulla remained silent, she continued. "Mr. Reynolds would like to speak with you personally. Can you come to the corporate headquarters tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Confusion clouded Ulla's mind. The CEO? She'd worked at Meridian Hotel for 2 decades and had never even seen the CEO. Why would such an important person want to speak with her now, after she'd been fired? Perhaps Prescott had escalated his theft accusation after all. I'm no longer employed by Meridian," she said carefully. "Mr. Reynolds is aware of your situation. He specifically requested this meeting. A car will be sent for you at 9:30. "Him?" Ulla's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "Mr. Reynolds prefers to discuss the matter in person. The car will be there at 9:30. The woman's tone softened slightly. "And Mrs. Petrov, he specifically said it's not something you need to worry about." After hanging up, Ulla stared at the silent phone. Not something to worry about? Being fired had been devastating enough. Being summoned by the CEO like a misbehaving schoolchild, called to the principal's office, felt like unnecessary cruelty. She barely slept that night, her mind circling through worst-case scenarios. By morning, she'd resigned herself to whatever fresh humiliation awaited. She dressed in her one good outfit, a navy blue skirt suit she'd bought second-hand for her daughter's high school graduation, so many years ago, and braided her silver hair neatly. She woke Tommy early to tell him she had an important meeting and that Mrs. Guzman next door would take him to school. He'd accepted this with surprising ease, more concerned with whether they had any cereal left. She'd managed to make their last box stretch by eating only toast herself. At precisely 9:30, a sleek black car pulled up outside their building. The driver, professionally courteous, held the door for her, a strange experience for someone who usually took the bus. The Meridian corporate headquarters occupied the top floors of a gleaming skyscraper downtown, worlds away from both the hotel where she'd worked and her humble apartment. In the marble-floored lobby, she gave her name to a receptionist who directed her to a private elevator requiring a key card. The elevator opened directly into a reception area on the top floor, where an elegant blonde woman rose to greet her. "Mrs. Petrov, I'm Jennifer Walsh. We spoke on the phone. Please, follow me." She led Ulla down a hallway, lined with what looked like original artwork to a set of heavy wooden doors. After knocking once, she opened them, and gestured for Ulla to enter. "Mr. Reynolds will be with you shortly. Would you like coffee or tea while you wait?" "No, thank you," Ulla murmured, too overwhelmed to consider refreshments. The office was larger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Sunlight streamed across a massive desk and comfortable seating area. Framed photographs covered one wall, mostly of a handsome dark-haired man with various celebrities and politicians. Ulla perched on the edge of an armchair, back straight, hands folded in her lap as she'd been taught in the old country. Whatever was coming, she would face it with dignity. She'd been waiting perhaps 5 minutes when a side door opened and a man entered. Tall, with salt-and-pepper hair and an expensive suit, he moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to power. He studied her for a moment before walking forward, hand extended. "Mrs. Petrov, thank you for coming. I'm Alexander Reynolds." His grip was firm, his smile practiced, but seemingly genuine. He gestured toward the seating area. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Ulla remained perched on the edge of her chair, too nervous to lean back. Reynolds took the seat across from her, studying her face so intently that she resisted the urge to check if she had something on her nose. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he finally asked. Confused, Ulla looked more carefully at his face. There was something vaguely familiar about the shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, but she was certain they'd never met. She would have remembered meeting someone so important. "I'm sorry, sir, should I?" Reynolds smiled, a gentler expression than before. "You used to work in a bakery, didn't you? In a small town about 26 years ago in Rogers Park." Ulla felt her heart skip a beat. Yes, she had worked at Solberg's bakery when she first came to America, before moving to the hotel job after the bakery closed. But how could this man possibly know that? "Yes," she said cautiously. "I worked at Solberg's for almost 5 years. Reynolds nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "You used to wrap food in napkins and slip it into the pockets of boys who came in barefoot. One of those boys was me." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ulla. She stared at the powerful man before her, trying to reconcile him with her memories of the skinny, hollow-eyed children who sometimes lingered outside the bakery, clearly hungry but too proud or afraid to ask for help. "You," she began, but words failed her. Reynolds leaned forward. "I was 13. My mother had just died and my father was, well, he wasn't coping well. Some days we had food, many days we didn't. I used to walk past Solberg's on my way home from school just to smell the bread. You noticed me hovering. Started finding reasons to give me things, a day-old roll, extra pastries you claimed would be thrown out." His voice softened. "You called me Sir, even when I was a dirty street kid. You made me believe I was worth something." Memories flooded back. The thin, solemn boy with intelligent eyes. She had noticed him watching through the window, had recognized the look of hunger. She'd started making excuses to step outside when he passed by, offering him samples or mistakes that couldn't be sold. "Xander," she whispered, the name coming back to her. "Your name was Xander." His smile broadened. "No one's called me that in years. Alexander seemed more professional as I moved up in the world. How did you—" Ulla gestured vaguely at the opulent office. "Find my way here?" Reynolds Xander leaned back. "It's a long story. The short version is, I got a scholarship to college, worked my way through hotel management, made some smart investments, built Meridian from a single motel to a nationwide chain." His expression grew serious. "But I never forgot where I came from, or the people who helped me when no one else would." He stood abruptly and walked to his desk, opening a drawer. When he returned, he held what looked like a set of keys. "I heard about what happened yesterday," he said. "Daniel Prescott has been informed that his services are no longer required at Meridian." Ulla blinked in surprise. "We've been developing a new community initiative," Reynolds continued. "A program to reduce food waste in our hotels by partnering with local food banks and shelters." He held out the keys to her. "We need someone to run it, someone who understands both the hospitality industry and the importance of compassion. Someone like you." Ulla stared at the keys in his hand, unable to process his words. "I don't understand." "I'm offering you a job, Mrs. Petrov, director of our new food security program based here at corporate headquarters. The salary is twice what you were making at the hotel, with full benefits, of course. Tears welled in Ulla's eyes as the full impact of his words hit her. Not just a job, a good job. A job that would mean safety for her and Tommy. A job that would use her experience and knowledge for something meaningful. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Reynolds smiled. Say yes, and know that I wouldn't be offering if I didn't think you were the perfect person for the position. This isn't charity, Mrs. Petrov. This is business. Smart business. That serves our community, and frankly it's long overdue. He pressed the keys into her hand. These are for your office down the hall. Jennifer will show you around and get you set up. There's a lot of work ahead. Paperwork, partnership development, logistics, but I think you'll find it rewarding. Ulla looked down at the keys in her palm, then back at the man before her. No longer the hungry boy from her past, but someone who remembered kindness and sought to repay it. Not with mere gratitude, but with opportunity. Thank you, she said simply. I won't disappoint you. I know you won't, Reynolds replied. Now, there's something else we need to discuss. He returned to his chair. Tell me about your grandson. Surprised, Ulla found herself sharing Tommy's story, how her daughter's addiction had led to Ulla becoming his guardian 4 years ago, his struggles in school, his brightness and resilience despite everything. Reynolds listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. When she finished, he nodded decisively. Meridian has a scholarship program for employees' children and grandchildren. I think Tommy would be an excellent candidate for our educational support initiative. Fresh tears sprang to Ulla's eyes. Mr. Reynolds, Alexander, he corrected gently. Or Xander, if you prefer. After all, you knew me before anyone called me sir and meant it. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Ulla felt the tight knot of worry in her chest begin to loosen. She had spent so long fighting just to survive, to keep Tommy fed and housed and safe, that she'd forgotten what hope felt like. As she left the office that day, following Jennifer to see her new workspace, Ulla felt something shift inside her. The future, which had seemed so bleak just yesterday, now held possibility. Not just for her, but for Tommy, the next generation, who deserved more than leftover bread and overripe bananas. She thought of the small plastic bag that had nearly cost her everything and how instead it had led her here, to a place where her experience was valued, where compassion wasn't a weakness but a strength, where the crumbs she had once shared had returned as a feast. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, Ulla's first week as director of the food security program was overwhelming in ways both challenging and exhilarating. Her small office on the executive floor felt like a foreign country compared to the bustling kitchen where she'd spent decades. Her hands, accustomed to chopping vegetables and scrubbing pots, now navigated computer keyboards and signed documents. But the greatest adjustment was being listened to, truly heard, when she spoke. At her first meeting with the program development team, Ulla had sat silently, expecting to be told what to do, but Reynolds, Alexander as he insisted she call him, had turned to her expectantly. Ulla, you're the expert here. Where do we start? She'd hesitated only briefly before the words began flowing. 20 years of witnessing waste in hotel kitchens had given her plenty of ideas about how things could be improved. She knew exactly which items typically went unused, which preparation methods resulted in excess, which foods could be safely preserved, and which needed immediate distribution. To her surprise, people took notes on her words. A young executive with an expensive haircut asked insightful follow-up questions. By meeting's end, they had the foundation of an implementation plan based largely on her practical experience. See, Alexander had said quietly as they left the conference room, I told you were the perfect person for this job. Returning home each evening to the tiny apartment now felt like stepping between worlds. Tommy had initially been confused by her new position, but Grandma, you're a cook, but had quickly embraced the change when he realized it meant she came home without smelling of grease and with far less physical pain than her kitchen work had caused. On Friday afternoon, Jennifer knocked on Ulla's office door with a manila envelope. "These are the forms for Tommy's scholarship application," she explained. "Mr. Reynolds fast-tracked the approval, but there's still some paperwork." Ulla accepted the envelope, still not quite believing this additional blessing. "What exactly does the scholarship involve?" Jennifer smiled. "It would cover tuition to Lakeside Preparatory Academy. It's one of the best schools in Chicago, college. Preparatory curriculum, excellent arts program, small class sizes." Ulla's eyes widened. She'd passed Lakeside's imposing brick buildings on the bus, but had never imagined Tommy might attend such a place. "But we don't live in that neighborhood." "Transportation is included," Jennifer assured her. "And before you worry about him fitting in, the scholarship program is comprehensive. School trips, uniforms, supplies, even a technology stipend." That night, Ulla spread the scholarship papers on their kitchen table after Tommy went to bed. The opportunity was almost too enormous to comprehend. Tommy in a prestigious private school. Tommy with every educational advantage she'd never been able to provide. Tommy with doors opening before him rather than closing. As she carefully filled out each form, Ulla found herself reflecting on how drastically their circumstances had changed in just 1 week. The bills that had seemed insurmountable now appeared manageable with her new salary. The future, which had loomed like a threatening shadow, now beckoned with possibility. Yet, amidst her gratitude, a sliver of unease persisted. What if she couldn't handle the responsibilities of her new position? What if Tommy struggled to adjust to a new school environment? What if this miracle was somehow rescinded, leaving them to fall from an even greater height? The following Monday, Ulla arrived at work to find Alexander waiting by her office. "Got a minute?" he asked, gesturing toward the elevator. They rode down to the lobby and walked 2 blocks to a construction site surrounded by scaffolding. Workers in hard hats nodded respectfully as Alexander led her through a temporary entrance. Inside, the space was raw. Exposed beams, concrete floors, wiring hanging from unfinished ceilings, but Ulla could see the bones of what would become a large, open facility. "This will be our first community food center," Alexander explained, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Commercial kitchen there," he pointed to one end. "Dining area here, food storage, refrigeration units, and distribution center along that wall." Ulla turned slowly, taking in the massive space. "This is part of the program?" Alexander nodded. "Phase 2. First, we implement waste reduction protocols in all our hotels and establish distribution partnerships. Then we create permanent facilities like this one, where excess food can be properly processed, stored, and served." He walked toward what would eventually be the kitchen area. "We'll need staff who can train people in food preparation, safety standards, nutrition. People with experience." He turned to face her. "Your experience." Ulla felt a rush of understanding. This wasn't just about redistributing leftover dinner rolls and aging fruit. This was about creating systematic change, the kind that might have helped her and Tommy during their darkest times. The kind that might have helped Alexander himself as a hungry boy. "It's ambitious," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed, "but necessary. And if we succeed here in Chicago, we'll implement the model nationwide." As they walked back to the office, Ulla found herself seeing the streets differently, noticing the people huddled in doorways, the children whose clothes hung too loosely on thin frames. People she'd always seen, but had been too caught in her own struggle to truly help. "Why me?" she finally asked, as they waited at a crosswalk. "Surely there are people with more experience managing programs like this." Alexander considered her question before answering. "There are plenty of people with MBAs and impressive resumes, but very few who understand both sides of this issue, the business operations and the human need." The light changed, and they began crossing. "Even fewer who've demonstrated the kind of compassion that sees value in everyone, regardless of their circumstances." That night, Ulla told Tommy about Lakeside Academy. His initial excitement, "They have a robotics lab, Grandma," gave way to apprehension as he considered leaving his friends and familiar surroundings. "What if the other kids think I'm weird?" he asked, pushing his spaghetti around his plate. "What if I'm not smart enough?" Ulla recognized the fear in his eyes. the same fear she'd felt walking into her corporate office that first day. "You?" "No," she said carefully. "When I first came to America, I knew very little English. I was afraid all the time. Afraid of saying the wrong thing, of not understanding, of people thinking I was stupid." She reached across the table to take his hand. "But I learned that most people are kinder than we expect. And that being different can be a strength, not a weakness." Tommy considered this. "Were you scared at your new job?" "Terrified," she admitted with a small smile, "but also excited. Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones that scare us a little." Tommy twirled spaghetti onto his fork. "Did you know Mr. Reynolds before? You never mentioned him." Ulla hesitated, uncertain how to explain the connection without revealing the depths of hardship they'd endured. "I knew him many years ago, when he was about your age. I worked in a bakery then, and he would come by sometimes." "Is that why he gave you this job? Because you were friends?" "Not exactly friends," Ulla said thoughtfully. "I was kind to him during a difficult time in his life. I never expected him to remember, much less repay that kindness." She squeezed Tommy's hand. "Which is an important lesson, moj dragi. You never know how the good you put into the world might someday return to you." Tommy seemed satisfied with this explanation, but later, as Ulla tucked him into bed, he asked one more question. "Grandma, if your new job is helping hungry people, does that mean we won't be hungry anymore either?" The innocent question pierced Ulla's heart. She'd tried so hard to shield him from their financial struggles, but children absorbed more than adults realized. He'd been aware of their precarious situation all along. "That's right," she whispered, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "We won't be hungry anymore." The next morning brought Ulla's first major challenge in her new role. Alexander called an emergency meeting of the program team. One of Meridian's largest Chicago hotels had experienced a refrigeration system failure overnight, leaving massive quantities of food at risk of spoilage. "This is exactly the kind of situation our program needs to address," Alexander explained to the assembled team. "But since we're not fully operational yet, we need an interim solution." "Ulla, thoughts?" All eyes turned to her. A week ago, she would have shrunk from such attention. Today, she leaned forward. "We need transportation, temporary cold storage, and distribution partners immediately," she said. "I suggest we contact the Greater Chicago Food Depository. They have the infrastructure to handle this volume and can coordinate with multiple shelters." For the next several hours, Ulla found herself coordinating an impromptu rescue operation, directing hotel staff on proper packing procedures, arranging for refrigerated trucks, communicating with food depository personnel. By day's end, thousands of pounds of high-quality food had been redirected to Chicago's hungry rather than landfills. As workers loaded the last containers onto trucks, Alexander appeared beside her in the hotel's loading dock. "Impressive work," he said. "Most people would have needed weeks to establish the relationships you activated in hours." Ulla shrugged. "I've lived in Chicago a long time. When you've experienced need yourself, you learn who helps and who doesn't." Alexander studied her face. "You know, when I became CEO 5 years ago, one of my first initiatives was to create a more comprehensive employee support system, emergency assistance funds, housing support, childcare subsidies, things I wished had existed when I was growing." "Top," he sighed. "But it never occurred to me that employees might be too proud or afraid to access those resources, or unaware they exist," Ulla added gently. "Yes," Alexander acknowledged. "That's something we need to address in the program rollout, making sure people know help is available without shame or judgment." As the trucks pulled away, Ulla felt a profound sense of accomplishment, unlike anything she'd experienced in years of kitchen work. She had helped transform potential waste into immediate nourishment for people who needed it. People like she and Tommy had been just days ago. That evening, as she showed Tommy the Lakeside Academy brochure, her phone rang. It was Jennifer, calling with unexpected news. The parent company that had been supplying uniforms for Meridian staff was interested in partnering with the food security program. Specifically, they wanted to provide clothing vouchers for families receiving food assistance. "They're asking for a meeting tomorrow to discuss logistics," Jennifer explained. "Mr. Reynolds thought you should lead it, since clothing security was one of the additional needs you identified in your program outline." After hanging up, Ulla sat stunned. The small suggestions she'd made in meetings were being taken seriously, implemented even before the program was fully launched. Her voice, so long confined to the background noise of kitchen operations, was now directing meaningful change. She looked over at Tommy, who was excitedly reading about Lakeside's science program, and felt a surge of something unfamiliar. Not just hope for survival, but ambition. Ambition for what she and this program could accomplish. Ambition for Tommy's future. Ambition for herself, at an age when most people were considering retirement rather than new beginnings. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity, meetings with potential partners, site visits to Meridian properties, development of training protocols, hiring interviews for program staff. Ulla found herself drawing on skills she hadn't known she possessed. Leadership, strategic thinking, public speaking, negotiation. Each evening, she returned home with new stories to share with Tommy about fancy conference rooms and important people who listened when she spoke. About the growing network of organizations joining their effort. About Alexander's unwavering support whenever she encountered resistance. Tommy, meanwhile, prepared for his transition to Lakeside. They'd visited the school together, meeting his future teachers and touring facilities that seemed impossibly advanced compared to his current public school. The admissions director had been warm and reassuring, explaining how the scholarship program would provide everything Tommy needed to thrive. "Your grandson shows remarkable potential," she'd told Ulla privately. "His test scores are outstanding, especially in mathematics and science. With the right support, there's no limit to what he might achieve." Listening to the woman's assessment, Ulla had felt tears threatening. How close they had come to having that potential squandered by poverty and circumstance. You'll never guess what happened next, but keep reading to discover how fate was about to take an unexpected turn for Ulla and Tommy. At home that night, Tommy had rushed to their apartment computer, a refurbished model provided through the scholarship program, to research robotics competitions mentioned during their tour. "Grandma, Lakeside's team won nationals last year," he exclaimed. "They build robots that can solve problems and do tasks. Do you think they'd let me join?" "I'm certain they would," Ulla replied, watching him scroll through photos of proud students with their mechanical creations. The eager light in his eyes, a light that had dimmed during their hardest times, now burned bright again. Later, after Tommy was asleep, Ulla sat at their kitchen table reviewing program documents. The Food Security Initiative would officially launch in 3 weeks, with a media event at the newly completed community center. Alexander had asked her to speak at the ceremony, to tell her story and explain the program's mission. The thought of addressing cameras and reporters terrified her, but she understood the importance. People needed to see that hunger wasn't abstract. It happened to real people, even those working full-time jobs. It happened to children like Tommy, to boys like Alexander had once been. A knock at the door startled her from these thoughts. No one visited their apartment, especially not at 9:30 in the evening. Cautiously, she checked the peephole to find Daniel Prescott, her former manager, standing in the hallway. Shock and instinctive fear coursed through her. Why would he come here? How had he even found their address? She considered not answering, but curiosity overcame caution. She opened the door partially, chain lock still engaged. "Mr. Prescott?" He looked different outside the hotel, smaller somehow, less intimidating. His expression held none of the coldness from their last encounter. "Mrs. Petrov," he said, his voice subdued. "I apologize for coming unannounced. I was hoping we might speak briefly." Conflicting emotions warred within her, anger at how he'd treated her, fear of his purpose here, uncertainty about his intentions. But her innate decency prevailed. "One moment," she said, closing the door to remove the chain before reopening it. "Please keep your voice down. My grandson is sleeping." Prescott entered awkwardly, standing just inside the door as his eyes took in their modest apartment. For the first time, Ulla saw her home through an outsider's perspective. The worn furniture, the carefully patched curtains, the small space serving as kitchen, dining room, and living room all at once. "Would you like to sit?" she offered, gesturing to the kitchen table. Prescott nodded, taking a seat across from her program papers. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts. "I've been replaced," he finally said. "After 27 years with Meridian, I was terminated yesterday." Ulla said nothing, uncertain how to respond or why he was telling her this. The regional director said it was due to management practices inconsistent with company values, specifically citing my handling of your situation. He looked directly at her. Apparently, Mr. Reynolds himself reviewed the security footage and was displeased with my decision. Ulla felt a twinge of sympathy despite herself. She knew the gut punch, feeling of sudden termination, the disorientation of having one's professional identity stripped away in a moment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, meaning it. Prescott shook his head. "I didn't come for sympathy. I came because I owe you an apology." The words seemed difficult for him. "I've been hotel management for nearly 3 decades. I've always believed strict rule enforcement was the mark of good leadership. But watching that footage again, seeing the look on your face when I fired you..." He paused. "I've been unable to sleep since." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the table between them. "This contains a formal apology letter for your personnel file, acknowledging that I acted without proper investigation or consideration of your service record. It also contains a recommendation letter. I understand you've already secured a position at corporate, but thought you might want these documents regardless." Ulla stared at the envelope, touched by the gesture while simultaneously recognizing its inadequacy. Had Alexander not intervened, these documents would have meant little against the reality of unemployment at her age. "Why did you really come?" "Here, Mr. Prescott?" she asked gently. He seemed to shrink further in the chair. "My wife, she grew up poor, not unlike your grandson, perhaps. When we first married, she would tell me stories about going hungry, about the humiliation of it." He glanced around the apartment with new understanding. "Over the years, I forgot those stories, or chose to forget them. Yesterday, after I was terminated, I told her what had happened, why I'd been fired. She didn't speak to me for hours." Prescott rubbed his temples. "I've spent my career enforcing rules without questioning their purpose or consequences. I fired you for taking food that would have been discarded, food worth perhaps $5, without ever asking why you needed it, without considering your years of service or your circumstances." Ulla watched him struggle with these realizations, seeing not the imperious manager who had dismissed her without a thought, but a man confronting his own failings. "The world has room for both rules and compassion, Mr. Prescott," she said gently. "Perhaps your next position will allow you to balance them better." He looked up, surprised by her kindness. "You're a good person, Mrs. Petrov. Better than I deserved that day." He stood to leave. "I wish you success in your new role. The program sounds important." After he left, Ulla sat quietly, processing the unexpected encounter. There was a certain symmetry to it, Prescott's fall coinciding with her rise. But she took no pleasure in his misfortune. She understood too well the fear that accompanied such loss. She picked up his envelope, considering its contents. The apology and recommendation were meaningful gestures, if ultimately unnecessary. Now, she would file them away, not for herself, but for Tommy someday. Evidence that even those who wrong us deserve forgiveness, that people can recognize their mistakes and attempt to make amends. The following morning, Ulla arrived at the office to find Alexander waiting by her door, expression tense. "Prescott came to your apartment last night," he said without preamble. Surprised, Ulla nodded. "Yes. How did you know?" "Building security. Called me. I've arranged for someone to keep an eye on your apartment until we can find you more suitable housing." Ulla blinked, caught off guard by both his concern and the mention of new housing. "That's not necessary. Mr. Prescott only came to apologize." Alexander's expression remained serious. "Nevertheless, I'd feel better knowing you and Tommy are secure. Jennifer has some listings for you to consider, all within the Lakeside district. The company will cover relocation costs, of course." Before Ulla could protest, he continued, "It's part of the executive compensation package. You'd be due for housing assistance anyway." She recognized the gentle manipulation, framing the offer as a benefit she was entitled to rather than special treatment. Still, the thought of leaving their cramped apartment for a home in Lakeside's upscale neighborhood was overwhelming. "I'll look at the listings," she agreed. "But Alexander, you've already done so much." "It's not charity," he interrupted firmly. "It's investing in a valuable employee. You can't effectively run a program addressing housing and food insecurity if you're facing those issues yourself." His logic was sound, if convenient. And the thought of Tommy having his own bedroom, of not climbing stairs that made her knees ache, of living in a neighborhood with grocery stores instead of liquor marts, it was admittedly tempting. "Have you ever considered," Ulla asked carefully, "that your generosity toward me might be disproportionate to what I did for you all those years ago?" Alexander's expression softened. "What you did was see me, truly see me, when I was invisible to everyone else. You treated me with dignity when I had none. That lesson shaped everything I've become." He smiled slightly. "Besides, this isn't just about personal gratitude. You're genuinely the right person for this position. Your insights have already improved our program model significantly." Before she could respond, Jennifer appeared with news that their first partner organization representatives had arrived for a scheduled meeting. The conversation about housing would have to wait. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation for the program launch. Ulla found herself working alongside nutritionists, logistics experts, community organizers and publicity specialists, all treating her as an equal partner, despite her lack of formal credentials. She discovered that her decades of practical experience gave her insights others lacked. When a consultant suggested elaborate preparation requirements for rescued food, Ulla gently pointed out that such complexity would discourage participation. When a publicity draft described program recipients as the needy, she explained how such language could create barriers for proud people like herself, people who needed assistance but resisted being labeled. Meanwhile, the community center neared completion. What had been a raw construction site now featured a state-of-the-art kitchen, gleaming service counters, comfortable dining areas, and efficient storage systems. Training programs were underway for staff who would operate the facility, many hired directly from the communities they would serve. At home, Ulla and Tommy prepared for their own transition. They'd found a sunny 2-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained building just blocks from Lakeside Academy. The rent would have been impossibly beyond their means before, but was now comfortably within Ulla's new salary range. They would move the weekend after the program launch. Tommy had begun visiting his new school for orientation sessions, returning, each time with excited reports about science labs, computer rooms, and potential friends. The fearful boy who had worried about fitting in was gradually being replaced by an eager student anticipating new challenges. One evening, as they packed books into boxes, Tommy asked a question that caught Ulla off guard. "Grandma, were we poor before?" She paused, a worn paperback halfway into a box. How to answer truthfully without burdening him with adult concerns. "We had less than we have now," she said carefully. "Sometimes it was difficult to manage all our expenses." Tommy nodded, considering this. "Like when you brought home leftover food from the hotel." Ulla's heart constricted. So he had understood more than she'd realized. "Yes, like that," she acknowledged. "I wanted to make sure you always had enough to eat, even when money was tight." "And that's why you got fired? For bringing home food?" "For me?" "It's more complicated than that," Ulla said gently. "The hotel had rules about leftover food. I broke those rules, even though I knew them." "But it wasn't fair," Tommy insisted, his young face solemn. "You were just trying to help me." "Life isn't always fair," Ulla agreed. "But sometimes when things seem worst, they can lead to unexpected blessings." She smiled at him. "If I hadn't been fired, Mr. Reynolds wouldn't have found me. We wouldn't have this new apartment or your new school. And most importantly, I wouldn't be able to help other families who are struggling with food like we were." Tommy seemed satisfied with this explanation, returning to his packing with renewed energy. But later, as Ulla prepared their simple dinner, she found herself reflecting on how perspectives shifted with circumstance. What had seemed like devastating misfortune, her termination, had opened doors she'd never imagined possible. The day of the program launch dawned crisp and clear. A perfect Chicago autumn morning. Ulla arrived at the community center early, wanting time alone before the crowds arrived. The building looked magnificent. Branded banners proclaimed Meridian Food Security Initiative, nourishing communities. Inside, staff made final preparations for the ceremony and the meal service that would follow, the center's first official distribution to pre-registered families. Ulla walked through the quiet spaces, remembering the raw construction site from weeks earlier. She paused in the kitchen, running her hand along the commercial-grade countertops. This place would help so many people, people like her and Tommy, who were just one misfortune away from hunger. "It's impressive, isn't it?" Alexander's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him observing her, dressed formally for the launch event. "It's beyond anything I could have imagined," she admitted. "This is just the beginning," he said, joining her at the counter. "The Chicago Center is our model. If it succeeds as we expect, we'll establish similar facilities in every city where Meridian operates." "Do you think it will make a difference? Really change things?" Ulla asked. Alexander considered her question seriously. "It won't solve systemic inequalities or eliminate hunger entirely. But for individual families, for children who won't go to bed hungry tonight because of what happens here, yes, it will make all the difference in the world." He checked his watch. "The media will arrive soon. Are you ready for your speech?" Ulla nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. She had practiced her remarks extensively, working with a communications specialist to craft a message that was both personal and aligned with the program's goals. "Remember," Alexander said gently, "your story is powerful. Don't be afraid to tell it honestly." The launch ceremony exceeded all expectations. Local officials, community leaders, and media representatives filled the center's multi-purpose room. Alexander opened with remarks about Meridian's commitment to community responsibility, then introduced Ulla as the heart and vision behind the Food Security Initiative. Standing at the podium, facing cameras and attentive faces, Ulla initially felt her courage waver. Then she spotted Tommy in the audience, sitting beside Jennifer, his expression a mix of pride and awe. Drawing strength from his presence, she began speaking. "3 weeks ago, I was fired from my position as a kitchen worker at Meridian Hotel for taking leftover food that would have been discarded," she said clearly. Murmurs rippled through the audience at her directness. "I took that food to feed my grandson when our budget couldn't stretch any further. I broke rules I understood and accepted the consequences, never expecting that this lowest moment would lead to the opportunity before us today." She spoke about hunger's invisible presence in communities, how it affected working families, children, elderly people on fixed incomes, how shame often prevented people from seeking help until crisis struck, how systemic change required both practical solutions and compassionate understanding. "This center represents more than meals," she concluded. "It represents dignity, hope, community, the recognition that each of us deserves not just survival, but the chance to thrive. That's what the Food Security Initiative offers, not just food for today, but partnership for tomorrow." The applause was immediate and sustained. As Ulla stepped away from the podium, Alexander embraced her briefly before taking her place to announce the official opening. Cameras flashed, ribbon was cut, the center was declared operational. What followed was perhaps even more meaningful than the ceremony. Pre-registered families began arriving for the center's inaugural meal service. Parents, with children, elderly couples, single adults of all backgrounds. Staff guided them through the process, explaining how the center would function daily, not as a traditional soup kitchen, but as a community resource where people could enjoy meals, access emergency groceries, learn cooking and nutrition skills, and connect with additional services. Ulla moved among them, observing operations and addressing minor issues as they arose. The careful planning of recent weeks was paying off in smooth processes and positive responses. Particularly gratifying was seeing families comfortable enough to linger in the dining area, enjoying both food and community rather than rushing away out of embarrassment. As the event wound down, Ulla found Tommy helping younger children with a craft activity in the center's small childcare area. "You're a natural teacher," she observed, watching him patiently demonstrate folding techniques. He looked up with a smile that warmed her heart. "I like helping people learn stuff. Maybe I could volunteer here sometimes after school or on weekends." "I think that would be wonderful," Ulla replied, touched by his willingness to give back already. Later, as staff cleaned up and prepared for the next day's operations, Alexander found Ulla reviewing feedback forms from the first families served. "Congratulations," he said. "By every measure, today was a tremendous success." Ulla nodded, feeling a complex mix of pride, gratitude, and determination. "It's a good beginning." "More than that," Alexander insisted. "It's a transformation, for this community and for Meridian." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "And for us, personally. Full circle from that bakery in Rogers Park." Ulla studied his face, the confident executive so different from the hungry boy she barely remembered. "You could have helped me without all this," she said, gesturing to the center around them. "A simple job would have been more than enough." "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but then we wouldn't be helping hundreds of others, thousands eventually." He smiled. Sometimes personal gratitude and good business strategy align perfectly. As they stood together in the quiet center, Ulla reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a small kindness in a bakery decades ago to her desperate act of taking leftover food to this moment of creating systemic change, a path neither could have predicted. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for helping me and Tommy, but for seeing possibility where others saw only problems." "That," Alexander replied, "is exactly what you taught me all those years ago. Have you ever known someone whose small act of kindness changed the trajectory of someone else's life in a massive way? Please share your thoughts in the comments." The following weekend, Ulla and Tommy moved into their new apartment. The building wasn't extravagant by wealthy standards, but compared to their former home, it felt palatial. Spacious rooms with large windows, modern appliances, secure entry, and even a small balcony overlooking a neighborhood park. For Tommy, having his own bedroom represented unprecedented luxury. He spent hours arranging his books, clothes, and treasured possessions in the new space, marveling at built-in shelves and a desk where he could study without kitchen distractions. For Ulla, the bathroom was perhaps the greatest revelation, a full tub rather than just a shower stall, modern fixtures that worked reliably, and space enough to move comfortably despite her arthritis. Simple pleasures she'd forgotten could exist. Monday morning brought Tommy's first official day at Lakeside Academy. Ulla had expected some nervousness, but he bounded out of bed with excited energy, donning his new uniform with care and checking his backpack multiple times to ensure he had all necessary supplies. "Do I look okay?" he asked, standing by the door, backpack squared on his shoulders. Ulla's throat tightened with emotion. He looked so grown up in the navy blazer and grey pants, so different from the boy who had worn handed-down clothes and 2 small shoes just weeks earlier. "You look perfect," she assured him, "ready to learn amazing things." The school had arranged transportation, a shared service with other scholarship students, but Ulla had taken the morning off to accompany Tommy on his first day. As they walked through Lakeside's imposing gates, she felt him straighten beside her, shoulders back, chin up, entering this new world with determined confidence. The principal greeted them personally in the main hall, introducing Tommy to his homeroom teacher and a student ambassador who would help orient him to the campus. Watching him walk away down the corridor, chatting animatedly with his new guide, Ulla felt a profound mix of pride and wistfulness. He was stepping into opportunities she'd never dreamed possible for him, opportunities that would take him far, beyond her own limited horizons. At the Food Security Center, Ulla threw herself into establishing operational excellence. The initial launch excitement had been followed by the more challenging work of creating sustainable systems. Each day brought new learning opportunities and adjustments, discovering which distribution methods worked best, which menu items were most needed, how to balance efficiency with dignity for those being served. She assembled a team that reflected the communities they served, hiring staff who understood not just food service, but the complex barriers people faced in accessing assistance. Together they refined processes, expanded services, and built relationships with partner organizations throughout the city. Alexander visited frequently, using the Chicago Center to showcase the program to executives from other regions. Watching him lead tours, Ulla was struck by how seamlessly he moved between worlds, equally comfortable in corporate boardrooms and community kitchens, speaking with genuine understanding about experiences most executives never encountered. By the third week of operations, the center was serving over 500 meals daily and providing emergency groceries to dozens of families. Education programs had launched, offering cooking classes, nutrition information, and food budgeting skills. Most importantly, the atmosphere remained one of community rather than charity. People gathered not just for meals, but for connection, support, and shared experience. Tommy thrived at Lakeside, his natural intelligence finally meeting appropriate challenges. His math and science teachers quickly identified his exceptional aptitude, placing him in advanced study groups despite being new. At Ulla's first parent-teacher conference, his homeroom teacher shared glowing reports. "He's adjusted remarkably well," she told Ulla. Academically and socially, the robotics team practically begged him to join after seeing his aptitude with engineering concepts. Ulla smiled, remembering Tommy's excitement about that possibility. He's always been fascinated by how things work, but he never had access to proper materials or instruction. The teacher nodded thoughtfully. "That's the tragedy of our educational system, isn't it? How many brilliant minds never reach their potential for lack of opportunity?" She reviewed her notes. "We'd like to start Tommy on a specialized STEM track that could potentially lead to advanced placement courses by middle school. With your permission, of course." Walking home that evening, Ulla marveled at how rapidly their circumstances had changed. Just weeks ago, she'd worried about keeping Tommy fed and housed. Now, educators were planning his academic future with expectations of excellence. In quiet moments, she sometimes worried about the sustainability of their new life. What if the food security program faced budget cuts? What if Alexander left Meridian for another company? What if her performance failed to meet expectations? Old anxieties, shaped by decades of precarious circumstances, weren't easily dismissed. These concerns surfaced unexpectedly during a program review meeting with Alexander and the executive team. Discussing expansion plans for the following year, someone raised questions about long-term funding commitments. "Market downturns affect charitable initiatives first," the finance director noted. "We should establish contingency protocols if economic conditions change." It was a reasonable business consideration, but Ulla felt a flash of panic. For her, contingency planning wasn't an abstract exercise, but a lived reality, the constant calculations of survival when resources dwindled. "The communities we serve need consistency," she said, her voice steadier than her nerves. "People won't trust programs they perceive as temporary or unreliable." Alexander studied her face, seeming to understand her unspoken concerns. "The Food Security Initiative isn't a charitable add-on," he stated firmly. "It's integral to our corporate identity and community commitment. We'll maintain funding regardless of market fluctuations, even if that means adjustments elsewhere." After the meeting, he stopped her in the hallway. "You're worried," he observed, "about the program or about your position?" Ulla hesitated, embarrassed by her lingering insecurities. "Old habits," she finally admitted. "When you've lived with uncertainty for so long, security feels fragile." Alexander nodded, understanding. "I remember that feeling. Even years after I'd achieved financial stability, I kept expecting it all to disappear." He smiled slightly. "I still keep emergency cash hidden in my house. A habit from when my father's drinking meant we might have no money for days." His candor surprised her. Despite their shared experiences, they rarely discussed the poverty of his youth or her recent struggles. "The program is secure," he continued, "and so is your position. You've exceeded every expectation, Ulla. The center's success is largely due to your leadership." His reassurance helped, but the deeper issue remained. Learning to trust prosperity after years of scarcity required more than logical reassurance. It required emotional rewiring. That evening, Ulla arrived home to find Tommy immersed in a Projects spread across their dining table, wires, circuit boards, and mechanical components organized in careful patterns. "What's all this?" she asked, setting down her bag. Tommy looked up, eyes bright with excitement. "Robotics team materials. We're building competition robots, and Mr. Harrington said I could bring components home to practice with." Ulla examined the sophisticated equipment, marveling at both its complexity and the trust placed in Tommy to use it responsibly. "These look expensive," she observed. "They are," Tommy agreed happily. "The whole robotics kit costs thousands of dollars. But Mr. Harrington says that's why Lakeside has corporate sponsors and endowments, so all students can access these resources regardless of personal circumstances." The simple way he stated this, free from the shame or awareness of inequality that had colored his earlier experiences, touched Ulla deeply. He was accepting these opportunities as his right, rather than extraordinary privileges, exactly as she'd hoped. After dinner, Tommy worked on homework, while Ulla prepared for the next day's staff training session. Their new routine felt natural. Now comfortable evenings in a safe, well-equipped home, each engaged in meaningful work. When Tommy headed to bed, he paused in the hallway. "Grandma, I've been thinking about something important." "What is it, Moj Draghi?" Ulla asked, noting his serious expression. "When I grow up, I want to make things that help people like us," he said thoughtfully. "Not just cool robots, but machines that solve real problems, like hunger or housing. Or medical care." Ulla felt her heart expand with pride and hope. "That's a wonderful goal, Tommy." He nodded decisively. "Mr. Reynolds used his success to help others. I want to do that too." After he'd gone to bed, Ulla sat alone, contemplating his words. Tommy was internalizing not just the benefits of their changed circumstances, but the responsibility that came with opportunity. He was learning that success gained value when shared, the very lesson she'd unknowingly taught Alexander decades ago. The following week brought a new development in the food security program. Corporate partners had expressed interest in expanding employment opportunities for community members served by the center. Alexander asked Ulla to develop a vocational training component that could prepare participants for jobs in hospitality, food service, and related industries. "We're already teaching cooking skills," he pointed out. "Let's extend that to employment preparation. Meridian and our partners can provide internships and job placements for graduates." The idea resonated deeply with Ulla, who understood how closely food insecurity and employment challenges were linked. She threw herself into curriculum development, consulting with industry experts, educators, and community members to design relevant training modules. The first pilot class consisted of 20 participants, diverse in age, background, and circumstance, but sharing financial precarity and determination to improve their situations. Ulla found herself personally invested in their success, seeing reflections of her own struggles in their stories. One participant particularly touched her heart. Elena, a single mother of 3 who had lost her restaurant job during pandemic, shutdowns and never regained stable employment. Despite extensive food service experience, she lacked formal credentials that would qualify her for management positions. "I know how to run a kitchen," Elena confided during orientation. "I've done every job from dishwashing to line cooking to inventory management. But without certification or a degree, no one will consider me for higher positions." Ulla recognized the familiar trap: experience without documentation, skills without credentials, capability without opportunity. She made a mental note to monitor Elena's progress closely, seeing potential not just for program completion, but for leadership within the center itself. As the vocational program took shape, Ulla found herself increasingly confident in her executive role. The tentative woman who had once perched nervously on the edge of her chair in Alexander's office now led meetings with authority, made decisions, affecting dozens of staff members, and represented the program at community events. This newfound confidence extended to her personal life as well. She began volunteering with a local immigrant support organization, helping new arrivals navigate systems she had once struggled to understand. She enrolled in an evening computer class to develop skills she'd never needed in kitchen work but found essential in her current position. Most significantly, she began planning for financial security beyond her immediate needs. With Jennifer's guidance, she established her first retirement account, started building emergency savings, and created a college fund for Tommy, concepts that would have seemed ludicrously ambitious months earlier. Tommy's first quarter grades at Lakeside arrived in December. Straight A's with particular commendations in mathematics, science, and engineering courses. His robotics team had qualified for a regional competition, and his science teacher had recommended him for a prestigious summer program at Northwestern University. For a student who joined us mid-term, his advisor wrote, Tommy's integration and performance have been exceptional. He demonstrates not only academic aptitude, but remarkable perseverance and maturity. Reading these assessments, Ulla felt overwhelming. Gratitude for the opportunities that had opened for him, and determination that he would never return to the precarity of their former life. Whatever happened with her position or the program, Tommy's education would remain her highest priority. She expressed this commitment during her next meeting with Alexander, sharing Tommy's achievements with pride, but also underlying concern about ensuring his educational continuity regardless of her employment situation. "You're still worried about security," Alexander observed. "You won't believe what Alexander is about to propose, but it promises to change everything for Ulla and Tommy." "Not exactly worried," Ulla clarified. "More planning for all possibilities. That's something poverty teaches effectively." Alexander considered this. "I understand the instinct to prepare for worst-case scenarios, but sometimes that same vigilance prevents us from fully embracing present opportunities." He leaned forward. "The expansion plans we've been discussing? They include establishing a permanent endowment for the food security program, funds held in trust specifically for operational continuity regardless of corporate decisions or economic conditions." Ulla blinked in surprise. An endowment would indeed provide the long-term stability she craved for both the program and her position within it. "The board has already approved the concept," Alexander continued. "We're securing commitments from major donors and corporate partners, and I'd like you to help design the governance structure to ensure the endowment truly serves the communities we've committed to support. This level of involvement, helping shape not just current operations but long-term institutional structure, represented trust beyond anything Ulla had experienced professionally. It also offered the security she sought for Tommy's future. "I'd be honored," she said sincerely. Alexander smiled. "Good, because there's something else I've been meaning to discuss with you." He passed her a folder. Northwestern University offers an executive education program in non-profit management. 3 weeks of intensive study, designed for professionals without traditional academic backgrounds who are leading community initiatives. "I'd like you to attend the spring session. All expenses covered by Meridian, of course." Ulla opened the folder to find course descriptions, faculty profiles, and program details. The opportunity was simultaneously thrilling and intimidating. Formal education at a prestigious university, something she'd never imagined for herself. I don't know if I'm qualified," she admitted. "The admissions director disagrees," Alexander replied. "I took the liberty of discussing your background and current role with her. She was particularly interested in your practical experience and the innovative approaches you've implemented at the center." Scanning the materials, Ulla noticed the program included courses in organizational leadership, financial management, and strategic planning, all areas where she'd been learning through direct experience, but lacked formal training. "This would be during Tommy's school hours?" she asked practically. Alexander nodded. "The schedule is designed for working professionals, and for the few evening sessions, we can arrange childcare if needed." The thoughtfulness of his planning touched her. Even now, after months of working closely together, his consideration for her circumstances, both professional and personal, continued to surprise her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing I can do this." "I know you can," he corrected, gently. "Just as I've known from the beginning that you were exactly the right person to lead this program." Alexander smiled. Sometimes the most valuable talent exists outside traditional pathways. Recognizing that is just good business sense. As winter deepened in Chicago, the Food Security Center's importance grew more visible. Holiday season demands increased as families stretched limited resources to cover additional expenses. Cold weather made food access more challenging for those without reliable transportation. The center adjusted accordingly, extending hours, adding delivery services for elderly and disabled community members, and implementing special holiday meal programs. Tommy embraced the season's spirit by organizing a toy drive at Lakeside, collecting gifts for children served by the center. His initiative impressed both school administrators and peers, many of whom came from privileged backgrounds with little understanding of genuine need. It was Tommy's idea entirely, his homeroom teacher told Ulla during a school event. He explained to classmates that while food assistance was crucial, children deserved joy beyond basic necessities, especially during holidays. Watching Tommy coordinate collection boxes and sorting sessions, Ulla marveled at his emerging leadership qualities. The shy, uncertain boy, who had once hidden his lunchless status from classmates, now confidently advocated for others facing similar circumstances. The toy drive proved enormously successful, with Lakeside families contributing not just gifts, but warm clothing, books, and learning materials. Tommy worked with center staff to organize a distribution event where parents could select items for their children in a dignified, store-like environment rather than receiving prepackaged charity. On distribution day, Ulla stood back, allowing Tommy to manage the process he'd created. He moved through the space with confidence, helping parents find age-appropriate items, ensuring fair distribution, and treating each family with respectful attention. Several times she noticed him in quiet conversation with children who accompanied their parents, making personal connections rather than just distributing objects. Later, as they closed up the event space, Tommy shared his observations. Some of the parents were embarrassed at first, he noted. They didn't want to take things they couldn't pay for. But when I explained that Lakeside students really wanted to share, they felt better about it. You understood how they felt, Ulla said gently. Tommy nodded. I remember when you used to say we couldn't afford new shoes, or when kids at school had birthday parties I couldn't go to, because we couldn't buy presents. He stacked empty collection boxes thoughtfully. Being poor makes you feel bad about yourself, like you did something wrong, but that's not true, is it? No, Moj Draghi, it's not true at all, Ulla assured him, heart aching at his simple wisdom. Circumstances don't determine a person's worth. That's what I told the kids today, Tommy said. That getting help doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them or their parents. It just means we're all taking care of each other, like a community should. Ulla blinked back unexpected tears, overwhelmed by his compassionate perspective. At Teo, just 9 years old, he had internalized lessons about human dignity that many adults never grasped. As the holiday season progressed, the Food Security Center implemented Ulla's newest initiative, cooking classes for families to prepare traditional holiday dishes from various cultural backgrounds. The program served multiple purposes, preserving cultural food heritage, teaching practical cooking skills, and providing holiday meals families could enjoy with pride rather than depending on pre-packaged donations. To Ulla's surprise, Alexander attended the final cooking session before Christmas, rolling up his sleeves to help prepare traditional dishes alongside community members. His participation, unannounced and without media presence, impressed her. Despite his position, he worked alongside participants as an equal, learning techniques from experienced home cooks while sharing stories from his own background. My mother used to make something similar, she overheard him telling an elderly Vietnamese woman who demonstrated spring roll wrapping. Before she died, I mean. I'd forgotten until I smelled the ingredients. The woman patted his hand sympathetically, before correcting his folding technique. The moment struck Ulla as perfectly representative of the center's mission, creating space where people connected through food, regardless of status or circumstance. Later, as participants departed with prepared meals and leftover ingredients, Alexander helped with cleanup while they discussed upcoming program developments. The vocational training is exceeding expectations, Ulla reported. 15 participants will complete the first certification phase next month, 3 already have conditional job offers from partner businesses. Excellent, Alexander nodded. And the scholarship program for employee dependents. How's enrollment looking for next fall? This initiative, inspired by Tommy's experience, had become particularly important to Ulla. It provided educational opportunities for children whose parents or guardians worked at Meridian Properties or affiliated businesses, regardless of their position within the company. 27 applications so far, she replied. From bellhops' children, housekeepers' grandchildren, maintenance workers' families, exactly the demographic we hoped to reach. And who might otherwise fall through institutional cracks, Alexander added, understanding her unstated point. Like Tommy might have without intervention. They worked in companionable silence for a moment, wiping down counters and storing equipment. Ulla found herself reflecting on the unlikely partnership they'd formed, the immigrant kitchen worker and the corporate executive, now collaborating on systemic change, each bringing perspectives the other couldn't possess alone. I've been thinking about next year's expansion, Alexander said eventually. The Boston and San Francisco locations are secured, but I'd like your input on additional sites. Ulla considered the question seriously. I'd prioritize cities with greatest need rather than largest Meridian presence. Detroit, perhaps. Or Baltimore. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. We'll need strong local leadership, though. People with your combination of practical experience and community understanding. I've been identifying potential candidates from our vocational program, Ulla replied. Elena, particularly, shows remarkable management potential. With proper training and support, she could excel in a leadership role. You're already building a talent pipeline, Alexander observed with approval. Exactly what the program needs, for sustainable growth. As they finished cleaning, Ulla noted the late hour. Will you join us for dinner? She offered impulsively. Tommy and I were planning a simple meal, but we'd welcome company. Alexander hesitated, seeming surprised by the invitation. I wouldn't want to intrude on your family time. You wouldn't be intruding, Ulla assured him. Tommy would enjoy showing you his latest robotics project, and truthfully, we have more food than 2 people can reasonably eat. Her casual reference to food abundance, once unimaginable in their household, wasn't lost on either of them. Alexander smiled, understanding the significance beneath her simple invitation. I'd be honored, he said. That evening, in their modest but comfortable apartment, Ulla watched as Tommy enthusiastically demonstrated his robot design to Alexander, who asked technical questions that delighted the boy with their specificity. The scene struck her as both ordinary and extraordinary, a simple family dinner that represented journey's end and beginning simultaneously. From the desperate woman clutching leftover bread to her chest in the hotel parking lot, to the program director hosting her CEO for dinner while her grandson discussed engineering principles he was learning at an elite private school, the transformation seemed almost mythical in scope. Yet it had happened through a series of very human connections. A woman showing kindness to a hungry boy decades ago. That boy, grown to manhood, recognizing her in a moment of crisis. Both choosing to extend the circle of compassion beyond their personal relationship to create systemic change. As they shared the simple meal, Ulla felt a profound sense of rightness. Not just about her improved circumstances or Tommy's brightening future, but about the work they were all engaged in, creating structures that would help others experience similar transformations. The small kindness she had once shown a hungry boy named Xander had indeed returned as a feast, not just for her and Tommy, but potentially for many others who would follow in their footsteps. Late that night, after Tommy had gone to bed and Alexander had departed with warm thanks, Ulla stood at her kitchen window, gazing out at the city lights. She thought of all the invisible struggles happening behind lit windows across Chicago, families making impossible choices between rent and food, children going to bed hungry, parents sacrificing their own needs for their children's sake. But, now because of what they'd built together, some of those struggles would ease. Some of those impossible choices would become unnecessary. Some of those children would sleep with full bellies and wake to new possibilities. As winter gave way, to spring, the food security program, flourished beyond initial projections. The center consistently served over 700 meals daily, while vocational training graduated its first cohort with an 80% job placement rate. The educational scholarship program had selected its inaugural class, with 40 children from service industry families receiving placements at quality schools across the city. Ulla completed the Northwestern Executive Education Program with honors, surprising herself with her aptitude for formal academic work. The credentials strengthened her confidence in leadership settings and provided theoretical frameworks for the practical knowledge she'd always possessed. Planning began in earnest for centers in Boston and San Francisco, with Ulla traveling monthly to help establish appropriate models for each community's specific needs. Elena, as anticipated, demonstrated exceptional capability and was named Assistant Director of the Chicago Center, positioning her for potential leadership of a future location. Tommy finished his first school year at Lakeside with academic distinctions and social confidence that transformed him from the anxious boy of months earlier. His robotics team placed second in regional competitions, earning an invitation to national finals. Northwestern's summer program accepted him with a full scholarship, validating his exceptional aptitude in scientific fields. One evening in late April, as cherry blossoms opened along Lakeside's elegant streets, Ulla received an unexpected email from Alexander. The message was brief but significant. The Meridian Board had unanimously approved establishment of the program, endowment, with initial funding of $20 million, far exceeding original projections. Attached was a formal document naming the fund the Petrov Reynolds Endowment for Community Nourishment, ensuring both their names would be permanently associated with the work they'd begun together. Reading this, Ulla felt a swell of emotion. Beyond simple gratitude, the endowment meant their efforts would outlast any individual involvement, would continue helping families like hers long after she and Alexander moved on. It represented institutional commitment to values she'd practiced privately throughout her life: compassion, dignity, community responsibility. The following morning brought another significant milestone: Tommy's acceptance to an elite college preparatory track that would begin in fall. The program would fully support his education through high school graduation, potentially positioning him for prestigious university admissions and career opportunities neither he nor Ulla had imagined possible months earlier. That evening, they celebrated with a special dinner in their apartment. Nothing extravagant, but featuring foods they'd once considered impossible luxuries. As they shared the meal, Ulla found herself reflecting on their journey from desperate scarcity to comfortable security. "Grandma?" Tommy asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Are you okay?" Ulla smiled reassuringly. "More than okay, Moji." "Draghi, I was just thinking about how much has changed since last autumn." Tommy nodded solemnly, understanding beyond his years. "When you got fired for taking food for me." "Yes," she acknowledged. "A moment that seemed terrible, but led to unexpected blessings, like how you helped Mr. Reynolds when he was a kid, and then years later he helped us," Tommy observed. "It's like a circle." "Exactly like that," Ulla agreed, touched by his perception, "a circle of kindness that grows larger with each person who joins it." Tommy considered this as he finished his dessert. "That's why the center is important, right? So more people can join the circle." "Yes," Ulla confirmed, "so more people can join and the circle keeps expanding." Later, after Tommy had gone to bed, Ulla stood on their small balcony, gazing at the spring evening. Across the city, lights winked from countless windows, each representing lives as complex and worthy as her own, lives that might intersect with the expanding circle she and Alexander had created. She thought of the desperate woman she'd been months earlier, standing in that hotel parking lot, clutching a plastic bag of leftovers, terrified of being caught. How impossible this present reality would have seemed to that frightened, exhausted version of herself. Yet here she stood, transformed not by miracle but by human connection, by recognition of shared humanity that transcended social boundaries, by the simple truth that compassion, when organized into systematic action, could change not just individual lives but entire communities. The small kindness she had once shown a hungry boy had indeed returned as a feast now shared, with hundreds daily, with thousands more to come as the program expanded. A feast of not just food but opportunity, dignity, and hope. In that moment, Ulla understood that true security came not from accumulation, but from connection, from being part of something larger than oneself. The circle that had begun with a bakery worker slipping extra bread to a hungry child had expanded to include corporate executives, community partners, program participants, and countless others united by common purpose. Tommy was right. It was, like a circle of kindness expanding outward, gathering new participants, creating ripples that would continue long after any individual contribution ended. She thought of the small plastic bag that had nearly cost her everything, and how instead it had led her here, to purpose, security, and community, to work that mattered, to a life where neither she nor Tommy would ever again face the impossible choice between dignity and survival. From her balcony, Ulla could just glimpse the Food Security Center's illuminated signs several blocks away, a beacon in the neighborhood, offering nourishment of many kinds to those who entered. Tomorrow, she would return there to continue the work she'd been unexpectedly called to do, work that had transformed her from recipient to provider, from vulnerable to empowered, from isolated to connected. The circle would continue expanding, gathering new participants who might someday look back, as she did now, in wonder at how a single moment of crisis had become a doorway to unimagined possibility. How a small kindness, offered without expectation of return, could multiply beyond measure when it found fertile ground. For Ulla, that knowledge, more than material security or professional success, represented the true feast that had emerged from those meager leftovers. A feast of possibility that would nourish generations to come. In the quiet spring evening, she made a silent promise to that frightened woman in the hotel parking lot, to the boy Tommy had been, to the hungry child Alexander once was, that the circle would continue growing, encompassing more lives with each passing year, that the crumbs once shared would indeed become a feast for many, and in that promise she found perfect peace. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments, so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.